Okay, we're recording. Okay, should I? This duck stole this thing. Oh, sorry. Damn it. Okay, so this is building. There's a duck laying eggs outside my house, and I've been setting things out for her, and she just stole something and flew away with it. So this is building query / oh, Rob's trying to come in. Sprint F demo. What is today? March 27. The last meeting of the quarter / month. I proposed an agenda on Twitter, which we can stick to or veer away from based on what you guys are ready to demo or what the guests are most interested in seeing. But I thought latest updates on querying stuff, potential transform stuff, and Brendan definitely wanted to set aside some time to look at some wireframes that Chris wrote on what a new look on the compare. Oh, sorry.
Navigation.
Collection.
Improved navigation.
Collection view, yeah.
Oh, we're going to do collection.
Or both. I think it'd be great to get everybody's opinion on that. We'd love your honest first early views on what your collection view might look like. So B5, anything you would add or change from that?
That's great. I think I'll try and keep it light and move as much to questions as possible. Most of the team has mainly been working on bug squashing, and we've been on a very much just like a sort of cleanup, better error reporting, better stuff. And so there's not a ton of new features to discuss today. I can quickly demo how some of those errors are going to start to look in SQL. But that's kind of the extent of the demoing today. And then we just wanted to save as much time for discussion as possible. And if we end early or if we end up talking about whatever, that's fine by me. So does that work? Cool. I can go immediately into a quick just update on the SQL feature and like where we are with that. So we said we would try and get this shipped sort of relatively quickly. And so just for a summary, we're trying to do basically have SQL sewn into query as a new CLI command that we're trying to ship that is just query SQL. But the difference between query SQL and regular SQL is the data sets themselves are now your tables. And so you can reference any table, any data set that you have locally, as long as it's in a tabular structure, and use that to run SQL type queries against it, including joins and other sort of like database-like operations. We've been researching it a bunch, and I think we're on track to probably get it merged either late today or early next week. But things are looking good. The one thing I did want to demo with this, it sort of ties into a lot of the work that's happening sort of around the edges behind the scenes this week, is actually this work we've been doing in surrounding error messages and whatnot. We've had Ajmer join the team recently, and one of his first comments in using the app was just that the learning curve is a little steep with query. It's a very technical product, so there's that. But then on the other side, when we hit these moments of like people seeing this like error reading body end of file like error, it's just cryptic and it's kind of confusing, and it can be a frustrating experience when you don't actually have any information to sort of diagnose the error as it works. And so we've been focusing on plumbing a new system for errors into the app and addressing a lot of these sort of like usability concerns when people hit edge cases that we haven't properly addressed yet. So yeah, I just want to quickly I just want to quickly demo what some of that looks like and sort of get a chance to sort of show how some of that looks and feels. So I'm going to share my desktop. 1 second. Cool. Awesome. So hopefully everyone can see a terminal and half of a Slack screen and now just a terminal. Okay, cool. So the new query SQL command follows some new conventions set forward for our help argument. Oh yeah, we also have validation, which is nice. But just basically giving you when you type help, you get a nice sort of proper description that matches a lot of our conventions. I can make this slightly larger if that's helpful for others. But basically just like giving you a proper description of what's going on, explanations and exceptions, and ideally some examples that can actually work. We're just following a number of conventions that have been enforced in our documentation of our commands overall. So to give you a feel for what the SQL command actually looks like, if you add the country codes data set with this query add, you can then run the following command. So I'm just going to literally punch this in as an example because I have the country codes data set locally. Oh, this is actually a join. Okay, interesting. So there's a join. And so just to give you a feel, this is joining two tables together. on their 3-letter acronym for their the 3-letter ISO code. So like USA is USA, I believe, and there's a number of other ones. But this is joining the population in 2010, and their population in 2011 with their official name. So joins work, yay, fun. But we have, in demoing these errors, we have some issues that like come up here. In this instance, I'm going to try and query a table that is actually not, where the schema is not specific enough to actually be able to query, because there's ambiguous column references. So in this case, when we hit enter, we actually get a better error message, which says like, we can't use this as an SQL table, the columns have problems. And then we actually get a description of the problems that we have so that we can fix them. And so ideally, this will give us a sort of better, richer responses to actually be able to deal with some of this stuff. And we've also sort of plumbed this, once this PR lands, we'll actually have the capability to do this kind of thing all over our code base. And we've tried to do this in the past, and we kind of wrote it in a way that was a little too high level. This allows us to be a little more low level and give some of these very specific responses. And so what I can do is, as I clean up this schema, this would actually get better and better over time, and it'd actually be able to sort of like get at this. The other thing with our SQL implementation as we're getting started is we have a situation like this, where we have an upper statement, which is a function that converts a string to uppercase. This is actually currently not implemented in our SQL implementation, which means that when you try to use this, it's going to sort of create problems for us. As we try to, we're going to ship more and more of these things over time, but what we really want folks to do is actually run these queries and file issues against the functions that they'd like to see executed first, which will help us prioritize. So in this case, when you try and run this statement, we get like a nice proper error message now that says, hey, we're able to parse your statement. So like the statement is valid, but we can't execute it. Some SQL functions and features are not yet implemented. Check our issue tracker for SQL support. And in this case, we're actually linking, we've had some comments asking to link more to our actual documentation. In this case, we want you to file an issue. And so this isn't just a generic issue link. This is to the L label with SQL, so that we're actually saying, cool, go and look at the SQL labeled issues. To everyone on the query team, that means when something is labeled SQL, this will sort of help people with the problem of like, has that uppercase issue already been filed? And ideally, we can use this as a living document of that. But then you actually get the formal error so that we can see, okay, aggregated expressions must be named as the thing that we actually tripped on. So ideally, you sort of have all the information you need to sort of pull apart your problems. Yeah, and so that's kind of where we're at with QriSQL. Ideally, we're trying to do 2 things at once. We want to be able to ship both a new feature, but we also want to ship the capacity to improve the overall product of our, the overall quality of our project. Dustin.
Question. For that last error message, is there additional context that points to what in the input, like it tripped up on? Like, is there a way to add the fact that it was the upper function, or is that just not surfaced by the implementation yet?
It is not quite surfaced. I can go back to the error. You get like a positional statement, which is like gives you the point. If it's a parsing error, you actually get the at whatever byte number. And so we could do something more rich with that. The most important thing here is we actually can unwrap all of those errors to actually uncover that information, which is nice. We didn't have the capacity to do that in the past. Part of that is this PR will move us over to the new Go 1.13 errors API, which allows us to do the unwrapping tricks. In the past, we've had some problems with just not being able to sort of provide enough context to this. The other side of this, Dustin, while you were chatting, we've also talked a lot about how the error codes that the HTTP API that query has does not spit out rich enough. We basically usually just say internal server error on anything that doesn't work, which is just ridiculous and bad. This will allow us to sort of expand that by implementing a HTTP error code method on our query error definition, and we'll be able to pull that out.
Yeah, the API also returns 500 for things that are like expected errors, which is not proper HTTP semantics.
I agree.
Has to be.
So let's make it better. Yeah, Rob's nodding. Yes. Yeah, so that was the biggest thing I wanted to demo. We're really excited to get the SQL feature in, but we recognize that like this is sort of like a first landing, and then it's going to be a lot of work to make a really robust SQL implementation where we can sort of do upper, where we can do left, where we can do case insensitive comparison, where we can do all kinds of like that important stuff. And for us, it's a really exciting thing to do because we're going to be submitting all of these as PRs upstream to another project. This will actually be where we've intentionally set ourselves up so that we can just be contributing to a project called SQL, which will hold all of this implementation instead of trying to reinvent the wheel ourselves. But yeah, so that's our demo of errors and an SQL feature. Does anybody from the query team have any comments, or does anybody have any questions? Rob?
Well, I'm not from the query team, but I was, so last night I finally commented on that query get issue. And one of the things I ran into, or that it got me thinking about, was this question. I'm not sure if I actually explicitly asked it there, but how much is the API that that the query CLI uses to communicate with the node expected to be public, or how much is it viewed as just an internal method of communication between those two tools? Because I'm looking at this and thinking, like the SQL stuff is super useful for somebody to be able to just run, but it also feels like an important programmatic avenue into getting data out of query. And so is there a plan for like how other software should use that as an API? Like, are you going to speak something like, the Postgres protocol, or is this going to be an HTTP API that people should just be able to call if they have a node running?
Phenomenal question. So this PR, once it lands, will add an API endpoint /SQL that you can post a JSON body to with query and get back JSON values of the SQL results. You can also set the format of that so that it will give you back whatever you want. So you do format CSV and it'll give you back a CSV file of results. So absolutely, on day one, you'll be able to query the query API and use it programmatically that way. Cool. The more interesting question, Asmir, do you want to speak a little bit to the Postgres stuff? We've done a little bit of digging and research into this, and I think Asmir has a spike up, which we can talk about a little bit, including the capacity there. We don't know whether or not we're going to make that work public yet for reasons that I can explain. But I'd love Asmir to just give you the brain dump of what you were working on with the Postgres protocol.
Absolutely. Yeah, so I actually took it as a weekend hacking project just to kind of like scratch an itch. My first thought was as well, like, just could we kind of latch on to some existing wire protocol and have it talk to proper DB tools? So kind of like my first idea was Postgres, as it's kind of like open source and it has probably the most mature ecosystem around there. Well, not most mature, but it's quite wide, so we could use a lot of tools with it. And one of the ideas was different tools above the database layer, like Tableau or something like that, would actually be able to use it as a data source without us having to make an explicit query data source for those kind of tools. So I actually dug into it a little bit. So far, I had some initial progress. I made sure that we can actually establish a Postgres connection directly to query. So we do the handshake and all the kind of like ready for query kind of like discussion between Postgres client and us being a Postgres server. But yeah, it's still very hacky and work in progress. And I think it breaks on a very large amount of use cases other than the very much happy path. But yeah, we can establish a connection, and I'm actually going to hack around a little bit more over the weekend to see like how I can serialize data back to the client, so we can actually get something back as output towards all the Postgres clients. Then there is the whole thing about wiring it up actually to do the interface with query and QriSQL in this case. But yeah, work in progress, I guess. But first steps.
Yeah, and thank you, Asmir. And I just want to tack on to the end of that some of the sort of like project decisions around that. My big concern with, I think that like Asmir was immediately like, we should try and build this. We should just see how possible it is. And like you got really far really fast. Like we had a demo working where like you could literally spin up pSQL and dial to a query node over a port, and you couldn't run any commands, but like you could, it would acknowledge you and like be like, cool, we can talk. My concern is exactly what Asmir mentioned, which is like, if we're going to make that promise, that is a massive API service area for us to maintain and really sort of confirm we'll have a smooth experience. And on top of that, the OctoSQL implementation we're building on top of is not a Postgres compliant spec implementation. It doesn't behave the same way. So queries, you will not get feature parity. If you were just copy and paste between two things, you will not get the same results. And that alone is like a bit of a question mark. So to that end, we sort of said, okay, cool, let's try and see if we can make this. And for now, we may start this off in the enterprise side where we just build this specifically because I want to be able to say, cool, what is your use case? What do you want to do? Do you just want to do it as Tableau? Okay, if we just want to do Tableau, then we know that's a much smaller surface area that we can focus on servicing. And if we get that to work well and that becomes robust enough, then at some point we can just open source it when it becomes something that we're prepared to maintain. But it is the kind of thing that I would want to make sure that we have demand for before we go out and make a promise that we're going to sort of service that API. But that being said, anybody, it's an open source project, so if anyone wants to like mess around with an open wire protocol that like fork query and build something on top of it, we would love to sort of see that. That too is obviously an option. But for now, I don't want to make any promises that we can't keep on the API side.
That also just made me think, just curious if you have explored it or whether you even think it's worth exploring. Outside of wire protocols, you could provide an embeddable binary API like SQLite.
I don't know what that means.
So SQLite is generally set up so that it provides a stable binary API, C API, so you can embed it in any other program. So usually how other programs use SQLite is to embed SQLite, and so just like depend on it or reference it as a like dynamic library that should be resident on the system, and just pull it in that way. So it has like a standard C API that lots of things can talk to, the same way there's a pretty common wire protocol that everybody knows how to talk to for Postgres or Maria, etc.
There we go. Thank you.
A different, instead of a wire protocol, it's a C API that you embed, but like similar idea.
Basically, it's the thing that all the language-specific bindings are targeting. So you have a library that's like Python for SQLite. That's how it's implemented.
Right. Go ahead, Rob.
Sorry, I was just, the one thing I was going to say is like, I don't know enough about it because I've never actually tried to hook up to it or implement it. I just know that that's the general structure. That approach might be easier or more friendly to narrow down on which parts of it you support than like a big wire protocol. I don't know. Just a like thing worth thinking about, maybe. Don't know if it's how far you should explore into.
So in theory, we have the lib level of query, which is kind of that idea, where we have a set of functions that people can, in theory at least, like wrap and have their application built on top of that they pass parameters to, and they're using query that way. The thing is, like, we haven't in reality stabilized it well enough for people to do that without having things break for real. But it's something that we have been talking about making happen for query 10, I think, right? O.10. Yeah, like there's work happening to try and make promises like that work. But my opinion with the SQL question is like there's kind of this basic implementation that a lot of the common big SQL users kind of all share. Like there's differences between MySQL and Postgres. I don't really know what they are, but they exist somehow. Query is just going to be another flavor of SQL, right? Where it's like if you follow the stuff that you get from a textbook, then query will work fine. We're already only doing select, right? Like we don't know how we're going to do insert, update, delete, et cetera, et cetera. So we'll probably be in a similar situation in that respect.
Also, to just expand on the issue of like supporting a wide like surface area for the whole wire protocol. The wire protocol itself is not really too complex. Like it has a lot of moving bits, but once you get them down, they should be fairly stable. But the bigger issue is then that depends on our implementation of QriSQL, which then depends on the implementation of OctoSQL, which then depends on what's possible in the world of querying SQL queries against CSVs and so on. So there's a lot of ifs and chains in there, which will ultimately like break the whole like experience of what you'd expect from like a proper SQL database. So we'll probably have to just zoom it down to kind of like you can do only selects, and only if it's like 10 characters long, and we're not going to do anything else. So yeah, we'll see.
Yeah, this feels like a really great docs page. Chris has been the quality control test on a lot of this stuff, and he wrote up a great doc. Just like, you know, the first frustration is like you have to alias all your table names. You have to say as this, and that's kind of irritating, but it's just a thing. And so like if we can sort of at least write a query.io/docs page that talks about what you can expect with our SQL implementation, I think that would be a nice accompaniment to this feature. Cool. Yeah, any other questions on that? I'd love to move on and keep things rolling if we can. And yeah, we're gonna get this shipped, patch release sometime next week, which we're very excited about on the back end. So this will land sometime next week is my expectation. Cool. Chris, how do you feel about actually just pop an open sketch and showing at like the collection view wires? Look at that.
Or
sketch somewhere. There we go. Can you guys hear me okay?
yep.
All right. Sorry, before I jump into the sketch wireframes, I'll bring up desktop real quick and talk about some patterns that I'm trying to address with some of these mockups. So we have this concept of top level panes over here on the left, and you're familiar with the network tab, the collection tab, which is basically an index of all your data sets. It looks like this. Then we have the data set tab, which is for viewing one specific data set. And I think, some of the frustration, or maybe just, something that we've said we want to work on for a long time and just never have been able to get around to it. This collection view, originally started as the exact same view that you see in GitHub Desktop for looking at your repositories. And, we learned very quickly, as there's lots of synergy, lots of things that overlap between Git and Query, and then there's a lot of things that just do not. And one of those is that, generally you're working with one repository at a time for extended periods of time, and that's really just not the case with data sets, especially if you want to start mixing and matching them together. So this collection view, it's a lot of white space. This whole right side pane is just a drop zone for importing stuff, and all we have is this kind of naive, simple client-side search that's just filtering. If I say pop, I'll get a filtered list. But this really needs to be a place where you can actually manage these data sets, and it's just kind of not doing that right now. And the other thing is that the data set view is really kind of downstream. The only way to get into the data set view is to pick a data set, which makes me think that it ought to be basically below the collection view at some point in terms of routing. So that's enough of that, but we'll get into that a little bit in a second. So first thing I did was come up with this notion of a home page, which I don't know if people like, but it would be a place where we can just sort of give you recently used data sets. We can give you the news about future releases and featured data sets that people have shared and things like that. But that one's not as important. This one is a switch. This one shows the network view, which would basically lead with a big search bar at the top, and then give you ways to get to other things that are not on your machine. So people you can be following, feature data sets from Query Cloud, and then things that are recently published that you might be interested in. But what you'll notice here is that we've done away with this. Every single view has to have this kind of split pane where there's like a left sidebar and like a main content area, and gone with like a header that goes all the way across the page. And that kind of reinforces this sort of left to right navigation as well. So on the left, you switch top level panes, and then this will tell you which tab you're on. So if I were to search for earthquakes, for example, in the search field, I'm basically one level deeper, but I'm still inside the network pane. Sorry, this is highlighting the wrong one, but it should be this one that's highlighted. So yeah, now we're seeing search results for earthquakes, and if I hit the back button, I'll go back to the top level network pane, which is just the top level search. These would be search results that are paginated, and we'll give you the search box again, kind of like Google does, so that if you didn't get what you're looking for, you can just type it right back in there and hit enter again. And then if I click on a data set, then I end up on this page, this is a preview. So this is not on my machine yet, but this is where I'm, looking at I can look at the different commits on this data set. I can explore it a little bit without having to have the whole thing locally. And if I choose, then I can tap on this button up here that says add to my collection. And this is basically a context area up here for buttons that are specific to this type of route that we're on. So when you're looking at a preview, you should be able to do many things to it. One of them will be adding it to your collection. So that's what that looks like. And then this is just copying and pasting some existing wireframes. But if you click on a user, you should be able to get some kind of preview of what they've got going on. So that's how you navigate through the network. So a big refactor or big change is the collection view here, and we wanted to go with something that's more like a list view where you can do multi-selects and you can really manage your collection. So in this wireframe, which I have another one that's a little more advanced that I'll show in a second, in this wireframe we've split out the data sets by their namespace or by their username that owns that data set. We've got lightweight information about number of rows and how big it is and when it was last updated and that sort of thing. And the idea here is you can click on one of these and actually work with the data set, or you can check them as you would like emails in your email box and then hit delete, and the UI would change if you got multiple selected and things like that. So if you click on a data set, then you end up in the data set view. So this is actually exploring Chris Whong / USGS earthquakes. And I think what we're talking about here also is, like I said before, this view is actually downstream of collection. So there's no top level data set view. You kind of have to go through the collection of your local data sets in order to actually explore and use a data set in this set of mockups. What we also have is this ability to have, instead of a status and history tab, we kind of look at the working copy and the changes you're making right now as this sort of notional future commit. So we're calling it working data set here, but it's kind of the last stop on this train track of history, and it hasn't happened yet. So this is, the UI would change if you were to click on this part, and then you can actually do the editing, versus if you click on any of the historic commits, it just gives you the same sort of static display view where you can actually see what changed and explore that version. So it's kind of combining the two into a single pane, but it simplifies it because we're not having to jump in between two different UIs, one for editing and one for viewing. The editing just becomes like a different way to look at the same components. So we have the same component list right here. And then same thing, we have contextual buttons up here, so I can publish, I can check out, I can export a CSV of this version, whichever one I'm working with at the time. So that's that. We also actually, I don't know, I'll just do the little teaser of wouldn't it be cool if the timeline of history only looked like that, and you could expand that if you want to, or you could hover over these guys and find out, at what point the commit happened, what the message was, and then expand this if you really want to see, the full details. Anyway, just some things we're playing around with. And what else do I have here? Let's see. This is the improved collection view mockup, where we're trying to do this multiple select table view. So we basically gave it two different tabs here where you can say all data sets versus my data sets. I assume when you're in my data sets, it probably wouldn't show the username column. But here I can sort by any one of these titles or any one of these column headers. So I can sort by name or sort by username or sort by the most recent and that sort of thing. We've got some filtering up here, so I can do a string search for usernames and data set names and maybe some metadata. I can do a date range search, and we'll build some UI for that. So you can just quickly be, filtering down this list, because, we learned pretty quickly, when you're screwing around, when you're just beginning with query, you might have 2 or 3 data sets, but once you start getting 10 and 15 and 20 data sets in your collection, it becomes much more necessary to have a quick way of finding things. And I think this is what we have in mind for this sort of thing. And then we also have this little contextual menu over here, so you can do remove, publish, duplicate little actions without having to actually open the data set. So you can manage them better here. And then these little icons are supposed to be, I don't know if these would be things that actually you can click on to do actions, but they're just indicators at this point of, this one is published, this one is checked out to the file system, and then this little sync icon is meant to tell you that there are changes that exist out there in the world that you don't have. So you can go into the data set and sync it and things like that. So we can add plenty more of these little indicator icons that gives you at a glance sort of what is the status of this data set in the broader universe of query data sets. And I'll stop talking for now, but that's kind of the start of what we're looking at for Query Desktop.
Rob has a question.
First, this looks super awesome. These are huge improvements. Very cool. I think the two the two big questions I have around it are, well, the first one is, and I think this gets back to things that have always been not super clear in query, which is a question of like, is my collection more like a set of bookmarks, or is it data that I actually have on my machine?
I think it's definitely the latter. I think we want to make a clear distinction between the network. The network tab is where you go to find data sets you're interested in, or to share, to follow other users and like things and start things. And then the collection is what you've got. So it's like basically index of your tables of your database, basically. And so I would say when you clone a data set, I would expect it to bring you right here to view, and putting a little like new icon right next to this, or even in the place of the checkbox, you can do a little new indicator that says, "Oh, here's a new thing that you just cloned that you haven't opened yet," or something like that.
So that's functionally what it totally is today, the collection view. But we've been kind of circling around this idea of, what data sets. Well, there's like a lot of different sections of what a collection might entail, right? It's like the data sets that I've crafted for the world, or the data sets that I've made mine that I've changed. They're the data sets that I rely on that update in the wild that I want to subscribe to or follow, which I may or may not want to store locally. And then sort of a generic feed to discover other interesting data sets. And so, I don't know, I'd be curious to hear how people feel about what feels like a natural way to house those different use cases and other use cases for what data sets are yours, quote unquote, or ones that you like and subscribe to, or don't.
Nice. Yeah, anybody have any thoughts on that?
If not, cool. That's just, I think, an open area for us to be talking with users about.
Yeah, agreed. I think, Rob, you really hit the nail on the head. The question of like local versus not local is like a thing we have to struggle with. The other thing I just want to gather some quick feedback on is what Chris is really highlighting is here is a massive navigational refactor in the way through data sets. I'm seeing a lot of like thumbs up around the notion of a working data set. We think that really solves this like two tabs problem, or like this idea of like you're looking at history, you're looking at now. It seems like I feel like that's been a massive win. But the one I think Asmer, you commented in it, like one of the things that we're bringing up here is a sort of an app style navigation, which is bringing us a lot of these sort of like nice, these headers now give us a clear place where we're storing actions that we can take on that screen. This export in the screen we're looking at right now, we have export to CSV, check out files, and publish to cloud. There's like clear delineated things you can do on that screen. But we've also here intentionally in these mockups sort of like right now the current app has like a search bar and a back and a forward button to sort of make it have like a bit of a browser feel. Yeah, like this. And one of the things that we're thinking is there's a bit of navigational confusion here that the new mockups are hopefully going to sort of will hopefully alleviate, where you can now you have a more app style familiarity where it's just like you can drill into things and then you can come back up to a surface level. But there is no, it does mean that there's less like browser style navigation. So just wanted to gather any feedback from others, specifically on that. I know it's a fairly meta concept, but like having query feel more like an app. We're okay with this?
Rusty had a point.
Oh, Rusty. Yeah. Rusty, then Rob.
The confusion between the current working data set and history. I really hadn't much touch Query Desktop until the last couple of days, and first of all, it's an outstanding app. I guess Ramfox isn't here, but it's really good. But one thing about the distinction between history and working is there are pop-ups, right clicks all over the place in the data table and other places in various tables, and they look exactly the same in history as they do in the current data set. So if you mess around in history and you can't click on anything, and then you show up in the regular data set and you can, and sort of having a clickable thing, meaning the working one's editable, some kind of UI affordance that says, hey, you could do something with this instead of having to hover and right click on it. Well, I mean, hovering doesn't even really do it. You usually have to right click to see whether you can do anything. But some kind of visual difference between a history and a current working editable would be nice.
Yeah, I deeply agree. We're actually a lot of the code refactoring we're doing right now is exactly that. Basically, can you load the editable version? The editable component will be much more obvious that it is in fact editable. Ideally, we can avoid the sort of right click thing. One of the other things we're seeing a lot of is just this like context switching between data sets is a bit challenging right now, where like you're being able to jump from one data set to another is a little tough. As Mary, you had mentioned a little bit of that, sort of like comparing stuff on desktop. Do you think these new wires can help us a little bit on that frontier? Do you think being able to like go from the collection in instead of down to like a different section is a win?
Well, I definitely think there's less kind of like lateral movement. So it's in the simplest metric, less clicks to get from one point to the other. So it's less of a burden to compare those two. In some sort of perfect world, it'd be good to have two side by side somehow, magically. Right now, we can't really run query twice, but I think that would be like the killer version of things, like, or at least show a small preview somewhere, like remember this one, and then I'll go look at another one. But this is just me going ahead of myself for now.
Chris, do you want to talk about tabs?
We talked about tabs to basically have two data sets open at the same time, and I think it was a notion that like instead of a single data set tab at the top level, there should just be able to be multiples of those. And I also still personally I lean more towards like there should be viewing it in the app, and then there should be a notion of just popping it out, and then you don't get the rest of the UI. You just get just get one data set view that lives on its own, and then you can drag it wherever you want. You can drag as many of those around as you want. So that's kind of where my head goes with that, but I don't know. I also do agree that there should be some way to like fast switch between two, and I don't know what that really looks like right now, but I think popping out will solve that problem, though it might be harder to implement.
I think I said this a long time back, but I would still really enjoy or advocate for just being able to have multiple windows. And I feel like that would be a straightforward, and for me at least, non-problematic way to solve that issue. But yeah.
That's a really easy one. I think we can do that, particularly now that we've killed polling. There would have been a bit of an issue before where we have a lot of Windows React processes that are render processes that are polling the API, and now that we've shipped WebSockets, that should be far less strain on the system resources. Yeah, we can. I think we should file that as an issue. Just be able to open multiple query desktop windows at once. I don't see why we can't have that.
But would we want the entire app to be repeated in both of those? I mean,
for now, why not? It's an advanced use case, but like, I don't know anything.
And for the most part, the current design is so modal in its structure that it's not problematic if same. Rather than being more traditional setup, you have like one window is where you do your searches and everything else, and then you have a window for a data set. I think you just have two windows that are effectively what are two instances of the app today, and I think that would be okay because it's so modal. I think if you change the design to be less modal, then it would be problematic though.
Awesome. Yeah, good feedback. Thank you.
The other thing I was going to say is, we brought up that the point about search earlier, and I do think so. so today I've never actually touched the back and forward buttons because I am completely confused about what it is they would do, and like just never touch them. So I think it's fine if those go away. I do see a lot of value in like quick access to a search, although because searching or filtering or whatever you want to call it is kind of a very different thing in the context of the network tab versus the my collection tab. Like I'm not sure what that should be, and I wonder if it if what I really want is more of a like quick look whatever style, like I can just have some key combination or a search bar that's always floating up there that's really just a like typing shortcut to get to places. I don't know, but like I do feel like that would be useful as like a quick way to navigate around.
Yeah, hard to agree. We did start doing, like Chris has programmed in a number of keyboard shortcuts that are not really surfaced super well, but they're in the app as they exist today. We need to do another pass of making sure that they're clean. But I totally agree. There's this dichotomy. When we say search, do we mean network search or do we mean local quick look style? And I think that and the local phrasing even being a little bit flexible there. To that end, I think we should definitely have, I think network search, as much as it's very important, is actually less important than your local collection quick look style thing.
Could I recommend the term filtering for your local stuff and search for the network?
Filter and jump versus search and clone.
Oh, I think so. If I'm just like jamming on data sets in query, I can see the like, I want to type the first 4 letters of another data set and see it in an autocomplete list and arrow down and hit enter and be on that one. And then I want to, do command back or something, or command left arrow or something, and just go right back where I was without having to think about it and be able to summon that quickly. And that's very different than I'm just entering search terms and want to scour the results and like see if, I should make an informed decision about exploring this one more. It's very different than like, I'm searching for like a thing that I already know exists and I just want to get to quickly. Which is why I would say like an ever-present search for just kind of quick navigation that can do, that doesn't give you a pane of results, but is much more of an autocomplete, like here are a bunch of things that match the 4 letters you typed in and like pick one and be fast about it. Versus like network search, needs to take you to another page full of results and needs to, paginate those results so you can explore them. It's a whole different experience, which that's why I would advocate for divorcing those two and saying like, you got to go to network tab to search for data sets. If you want to do quick navigation around the app, that can be like the thing that's always in the top bar, but it gives you like autocomplete results. It's not going to take you to a page of results or something like that. It's just based on what you typed in.
Based on what Chris said, I no longer like filter, but find. You're finding within your own stuff, right? It's like find within page in a browser.
I think I dig that idea. I also like some of what Asmir is saying in chat, where maybe that works more like location bars do in most browsers today. In that the first N things that get listed are quick results from your collection. And then down at the bottom, either it's a like search the network single thing that you can click on or hit enter on, or it's like a couple results that are from the network, but those might load slower and they're at the bottom of the list kind of thing. I also think it doesn't need to be visibly ever present. Like it could be, I think Spotlight on the Mac is a good model where there's like a tiny icon in the top right. So you have some clicking affordance if you don't know about it, but you can also keyboard shortcut it and it just pops up in your face and you start typing once you're comfortable and familiar with the system.
Awesome.
Because I want to see all of my data in a big space most of the time.
Deep agree. I think just a little search icon ever present in the top right. Click that. That gets you find, not search. And as you said, Rob, the easiest thing we could do is just throw search the network at the bottom of this, and that's just a link to the broader search, and that just takes exactly what it is. Because the rest, I think you have a point. Like pluralizing the two can be a little bit frustrating sometimes, but if you just have a link to say, okay, this is my intention. I actually intended to do a broader network search here. Then we're doing network resource calls with behind a click, where we're not automatically assuming network for you, which is I think a nice sort of like observation of local first principles.
That sounds pretty awesome.
Awesome. This has been super helpful. Thank you so much, everybody, for taking the time to give some feedback. Usually we try to leave the end of these calls for just open questions and anything anybody wants to address. Before we get to that, Holger, I promise you we're going to ship some of these Starlark fixes. This is very high on our list. So, but if you have anything specifically you'd like us to address in terms of your work with Starlark, or if you'd like to speak to your experience with our transform process, love to hear it.
Yeah. Well, I had some issues or the feeling digging a bit in the dark concerning error messages, and I did not know what query was executed to retrieve the data, and was I right? I had some issues in my my overpass query, and took a time to find out, throw away the data set, restart again, and that would be helpful to have some insight what's going on, some debug output. So this is one thing, and other thing I want to dig into a bit more is the data schema, which data types. Well, I have some date types, some URLs, and will these be some data types, primitives, which will be added later on, or will there be some validations to just verify the format of them? And will there be some functionality to do some more in-depth validations, check for consistency between different fields? If field A has this value, field B may not have this one, or nullable fields. So these were questions which came to my mind. How can I specify some more details of the schema?
Phenomenal question. Yes, so I can try and answer them in order. You can add additional validation details. We touched briefly on them in the Discord chat, but for schema validation, Query uses JSON schema as its way of describing a validation logic. So I'll try and quickly demo some of this really quick, just so that you can see some of the CLI tools that talk about validation. Because we have some of this built in already, and ideally we can sort of answer the question about sort of like data type primitives versus adding additional validation logic that will supply Query Validate with more information to give you better validation tools. And then last but not least, make sure I tell you about strict mode before we finish. Or we can just start with it now. If you turn strict mode, if you turn strict is true on in structure, it will require all validation to pass before it can save. So you can actually set a data set up so that all of your rules become required instead of optional. Yeah, so here, I will quickly share my screen. And we'll do this from the CLI just so that you can, I think it's a better experience from the CLI right now. First I have to find a data set that has some validation errors. Oh nice, this actually lists errors. Here we go. Let's go to country codes. This is great. If I type query validate, I hope this works. This is, okay, cool. But first let's do the help command. Query validate --help. Help. And so what it's going to show us is that basically what validation does for us is it takes the schema component and it executes it against the data at the current version. So right now I'm only talking to like a version data set, and it will produce for us a list of the validation errors. And so when we can look here that the errors are actually counted at the time of saving. And so you can see the errors that query is picking up automatically. You have total control over what this validation logic looks like to sort of make sure that you are coercing your data into the shape that you want it to look like. So as an example, I typed this a little quickly, but if I type query validate and the name of the data set that I'd like to check validation for, and I hit enter, it's actually going to spit out the problems that we encountered. The sort of output of this is a little cryptic, but this is a number of error, and then this is a path to the place. So this is the 0th row in the 11th column. If that makes sense. So then the reason for that is query is interpreting my CSV file as an array of arrays. And so we're intending to build UI around this and put it in desktop. We haven't quite gotten there yet. But what's important is you can actually get the validation list out. And so some of the types, like this is a violation of a type validation rule, right? And so now to actually get what the rules are, I do query get structure dot or schema v5 and then the name of my data set. And this is going to give it to me in YAML format. And so as you can see, this is like just the most basic validation logic that we have right now, right? There's very little going on here in terms of the actual validation logic that we've written. This is just the stuff that query infers automatically. And so what this schema is saying is we have, if at the very bottom, you'll see this thing that says type array and then type array. This is basically saying this data set must be an array of arrays. And the interior set of columns is, this is the title of it, and then the data type. And as you asked, you know, is there going to be a date type as type for validation? The short answer is in the short term, no. What we're going to do instead is we have an additional validation rule we can set. I'm going to see if we can do this on the fly. This will be a fun test. Desktop, I can do query get structure, and I'm going to do B5 country codes. And I'm going to do this in, yeah, I'll do it in JSON format, JSON, and we'll set this to structure.json. I'm just going to, basically what I'm doing here is I'm outputting a file of the structure as it exists right now, and I'm going to change the validation logic and write a new commit to country codes. Cool. And so now I'm going to go over to a text editor and go to my desktop. Desktop, where are you? Home, desktop. I swear I can normally do this. I'm just demoing, and so it's, let's just do this. Structure.json, cool. Let's get a code editor, and let's unfull screen this. So what I can do here, if we wanted, for example, to make official name, okay, none of these are actually date times, but our documentation for this is a little weak, but we have all of the JSON schema things available to us. So if this integer could not exceed, for example, 10,000, I could do max 10,000, and that will actually add to the validation rules. And when I save this, this will enforce that as a rule on the whole thing. As I mentioned before, this is an output of the structure, so I can actually just do strict is true here, and this will mean that all validation must pass before we can save the file. And so if we go here and let's just do max, let's try this as an example and do max 10. I'm gonna hit save. And now I'm gonna run query save file structure.json, and I'm gonna try to make this save to B5 country codes. And it's gonna say bad, type. And Marshall object in the go value. So this is what we're talking about, rough edges that we need to clean up. Object into type of, what is wrong with you? Why are you upset? Let's try removing this. No, I can't remove that. Give me 1 second here. Let's try that. Huh. Why is the min not allowed?
Guess it was maximum and not max.
I'm
not sure.
There we go. If you get this right and I get this wrong, Holger, you're officially better at this than I am. Yeah, so that worked. And so we can, thank you for knowing that the word maximum is better than max. It's been a long couple of weeks. But as you can see, we can do a lot of these, and there is one that we do support for date time. And so if we look at, and in this case, I unfortunately have to drop down to the JSON schema documentation for you. But there is a date time format that we support. And there's, is this, what am I looking at here? No, this isn't it. Where is a good example of this? I'm gonna have to search the internet. Unfortunately, it's there. I'm gonna do the thing I'm not supposed to do and show you just our source code.
Okay, I will have a look, and perhaps on the way there will be some tutorial, some docs.
Yeah.
Validation. And just a quick one: is there a nullable keyword or so? Because we saw the empty string is not integer. Can I specify nullable?
Yes. Yeah, you can say required. So these are default to not being nullable. So you can do type. Now this, we actually have to ship a bug fix for this, because if you try to do multiple types right now, this is not going to go so well. But you can actually say this is allowing null. this is saying can't be null, which will sort of basically, we by default do not allow null as a value. Well, we allow it, we just yell at you about it. We can also set, there is a way to infer default in JSON schema. You can do a default value, which will not set the default, but it will interpret that as, so you can set the default to null, and that will say, okay, cool, that's not going to be, I'm pretty sure that will not cause a violation. No, that will still violate the type rule, but you can at least set what the default interpreting would be. You still would need to do one of integer or null to allow it, if that makes sense. There are lots and lots of things. The reason we implemented the JSON schema spec is because there are many, many things you can do here. And that's the whole point. If you wanted to say, like, we can get really aggressive and say this is going to be an object and its properties or should be an object of, it's only going to have something called, you know, ISO number. And this is going to be I can add a whole new subschema here that's going to be like type string. You can get very aggressive with this schema validation logic that you can write. There are actual support for conditionals, so you can actually say if the value is this schema applies, and if the value is that, this schema applies. Lots of things you can do, and so I'd recommend you play around with the validation side of this. And if you encounter bugs here, we have had folks using the schemas, but not so aggressively, mainly because we haven't surfaced it much in the UI. This is sort of something that, for us, it's actually quite a large project to then translate all of this into a user interface that you can just sort of like drag and drop in and make simple. So we're sort of, for now, just saying, hey, you can do this, but it's not going to be as easy. Inside of Query Desktop, this will actually show up in the structure display. And you can actually, if you want to you don't want to drop down to the files themselves, you can look at the structure as it stands, and we have this validation area here. And so when this is editable in status, hopefully one day we'll fix all of this, and it'll be awesome according to our new mockups, but I can actually come in here and just paste in JSON, and this will add the structure here. Let me know if that doesn't work. I haven't played with it much myself, to be honest.
Thank you very much.
Hopefully that helps the validation. Does that answer your question? Awesome. Thank you so much again for playing with all of this. Any bugs you're finding are really helpful, and it means a lot to be able to sort of like make sure that we're addressing someone who's actually using this as concerns. And yeah, not all of our users show up to calls and give us real feedback. So this is very, very helpful. Awesome. With that, it's 3 o'clock, and I don't want to take up too much of everybody's time, but this has been really great, and we really appreciate everybody joining. And yeah, I guess we will see everybody. We have another one of these calls in 2 weeks, which will be, again, the conclusion of Sprint G for us as a team. But ideally, you will be delivered a more stable SQL-enabled, prettier desktop with a pick your comma delimiter version of desktop at some point by the end of those 2 weeks. But yeah, thanks again, everybody, for joining, and have a lovely week.
Very good. Take it easy, everybody.